Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in AP English, and we now turn to a transitional lecture that will position on the one side everything we've studied to this point, beginning with our three really important epics of the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid, as well as our study of Greek drama. And we've looked at several Greek plays, especially through the prism of Aristotle's Poetics. On the one hand, then, we'll have that as kind of our first order of business and study. And now we're transitioning to several days of conversation about the Platonic dialogues and the enigmatic figure, shall I call it, by the end of this lecture, the Achillean figure of Socrates. Now, it is, I suppose, in some ways non-traditional to enjoin the study of Plato in an AP literature course. However, I'm thoroughly convinced it's necessary if we're going to do the kind of work that we want to do. And the place that I'll go to get us there is to begin with the four ologies of 303 in our study. Jot them down quickly. What are those four ologies, and what's a quick operational definition of each one? And we're going to expand to some degree, maybe even those four ologies, as we get into especially the last two. I'll give you a hint. It has something to do with knowledge, being, the individual, psyche, and groupthink. Oh yeah. So here we go. Let's go through them quickly. When we address our study of literary texts in 303 at the AP level, we're wanting to focus on the four ologies. First, of course, epistemology. That is to say, what can I actually know? And here we posit, of course, three potentialities. An absolutist position says I'm right and you're wrong. Again, as we've said before, the only problem with a position like this is you end up sometimes doing extremely dangerous and terrible things. Flying airplanes into buildings comes to mind, and lots of people end up dead. The complete opposite of the absolutist position epistemologically is, of course, relativism. There are no truths. There is no absolute. There is no right. There is no wrong, etc., etc. The only problem, as we pointed out, with the relativist position in the extreme instantiation is that it kind of starts to sound like the absolutist position. I know absolutely there are no absolutes, what we call the performative contradiction, and now we've got a problem. Between the two is, and I think this is where the Greeks will take us, is what we will call in 303 the fallibilist position. It's really the position of science before science becomes scientism. Science, when it becomes absolutist, is of course scientism, right? But when you have a epistemological view that says the following, fallibilism. I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. And to that degree, I wait for further data. I'm always looking for more data to help me make a position, epistemologically, about where I am. Okay? Number two, the second ology. And by the way, it stands to reason that we as scholars would obviously seek to employ most of the time, epistemologically, the fallibilist position. But what we're really interested in is asking, what do these texts we've already studied from the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid through our study of Greek drama have to say about the Greeks' view of epistemology? Okay? Well, we'll get to it. The second ology for us is, of course, ontology. That is to say, not what you know, but rather who you are. That is to say, being. Ontology, the study of being. Fundamentally, the question then here is, who are you? And for each of the texts that we've been studying thus far, we're going to see a certain kind of ontological understanding as well. In other words, what is a human being? And, of course, by extension, what does all of that mean? Now, the last two ologies, of course, will in some ways combine the first two ologies. And when we look, for example, at humans, we will always define that there is, of course, an inner and an outer, no question, both physically as well as, we would say, psychologically, culturally. So we have psychology and we have sociology. Psychology, of course, the study of the individual mind. That is to say, primarily, what motivates, and this is where we'll take for our study. Obviously, guys, about all of this, you can go on to university and study for a very long time in each one of these disciplines at infinitum, okay? So you can do that. We'll be focusing primarily in psychology on motivations. What motivates, okay, people, individual people, to do what individual people do, right? And then finally, sociology, over-related not to the individual in terms of primarily motivations, but the group. What makes people behave and act the way that they do? What drives them? What motivates them? What are the goals? And immediately right away, we have to as well jump to the question of ethics and morals, right? Morals typically defined as, from the psychological perspective, individual code. My own morals, that is to say, how I decide I'm going to behave when I decide that I am going to behave. What makes an action right? What makes an action wrong? Right? At the psychological level, we're talking morals. At the collective level, the sociological level, we're talking about ethics. For the group, what constitutes morally appropriate behavior? Let me give you just a classic example of this. In the Iliad, in Book 10, remember in Book 9 we have the famous embassy to Achilles and all of that, where he says, yeah, not interested in Time, not interested in Kleos. We'll get to those obviously in a second as we start thinking about this transitional movement out of that study into Socrates. But then the following book, in Book 10, we have this little interesting night fight experience, where Nestor says, you know what, we got to go out, we got to jack some people in the dark, which normally we don't do. Nighttime we sleep. Right? You got guard sentries, but they're there ostensibly to just kind of say, okay, we got guards tonight, yeah. The Greeks, however, check their own guards, and in fact their guards are away. Then they decide, let's go find out if the Trojans' guards are asleep or not. And it will be, of course, it will fall to the two great heroes, right, of Odysseus and his pal, right, who is going to say, okay, well, let's go together, and we're going to find out if in fact they're sleeping or not. They find Dolan, and what is it that they will do? They chop his head off when they find him, the Trojan spy. Then they go and they slaughter all of the Thracians who are sleeping, right? That is to say, well, I mean, we've got serious acts of violence happening while men are asleep. Do you constitute this as a morally correct or an incorrect act? See, we're to this question of ethics and morals, right? Obviously, within this poem, it's okay because the sentries were asleep, the guys get jacked. In other words, it's not our fault. Okay, it falls to Odie and his pal to go and jack a whole bunch of guys. It's okay. Now let's turn in our study to think about how each one of those ologies that we've played with have been answered to this point, and then what is so significant about the shift, as I'm going to call it, the shift to Plato, and more particularly Socrates. Well, let's ask first the question about what it is that we know when we pick up the Greek texts. All of this is assumed in the critique that will be the Socratic critique, and I would write it down this way. Socrates will critique, in all four of these ologies, the standard idea that will be presented in these classic texts. By the time Socrates is around, remember he dies in 399 BCE. By the time Socrates is around, the texts that we've been looking at are they're already classic texts. I mean, the Iliad is a classic text by the time of Socrates, okay? So in other words, it's been around, everybody knows it, everybody knows the subtexts behind the stories, everybody has it. And of course, because of the Dionysian festival, everybody knows these plays we've been messing with as well. So everybody knows Sophocles, everybody knows Euripides, everybody knows Aeschylus. They all know these plays, okay, because they're familiar with these storylines, all right? So when Socrates starts asking questions about these four ologies, he obviously is going to rock the boat, which is why in 399 they're going to jack it, right? I mean, they're not going to put up with his questions. But we want to concentrate now on the four ologies, if you will, and the ways in which those inform the Socratic critique, so that when we then pick up the Apology, which is where we'll start, we'll already begin to see that Socrates is both playing with the ancient Greek classic ideas in terms of these fourologies, and playing against. As an iconoclast, he's actually playing against. All right? So let's play the game. First of all, if you pick up the three great epics, the Iliad, the Odyssey. Of course, the Aeneid we throw in there, even though the Aeneid will follow, obviously, as a Roman epic. But for sure, with the Iliad, the Odyssey. I think what we're saying, though, to large measure, can also be said of the Aeneid. It just has to obviously be filtered, right, through the Socratic experience, because obviously Virgil has the advantage of Socrates and the critique of Socrates. What epistemologically, along with these plays that we've been messing with, in other words, what is it that we are told humans can know? With any assurance at all, what is it that they can know? And typically the answer is, well, not bloody much. Come to think of it, most of what, it seems, people know. Oedipus, I will get to the bottom of this. Absolutely certain I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Who killed Laius? I am definitely getting to the... Right? Creon, I am going to take care of my city of Thebes. I am going to punish whoever buried the body of Polynices. Even if it's Antigone, I'm doing it anyway. Even if my son Haemon tells me it's a bad idea. Even if the blind prophet Tiresias tells me I'm going to do it. The heroes of these stories, oh, they know stuff. No question. They definitely know stuff. But it always seems to come too late. You notice this? It's like, as one of you said, hindsight is 20/20. It seems to be the case that it's like, okay, we learn things, we know things, but it always doesn't matter in the end. Or, to put it another way, what the Buddha says when he comes to his enlightenment under his little Bodhi tree is, life is dukkha, the Sanskrit word suffering, pain, jag. Of course, the penultimate knowledge is the absolute knowledge. And that's the game that Achilles is playing with in Iliad 9. We all know death. You ain't met no 200-year-old people. And that's no throwaway line to say that the only difference between you and a fly is you know about fly swatters. Informing epistemology and the epistemological project of the Greeks is the certainty of death. Notice how many people get jacked in all these texts. Over and over and over. I mean, the Iliad is just a book of death, right? Let me show you all the different ways that the point of a spear or the blade of a sword can do nasties to the human body, right? But we're aware that even though Achilles doesn't die in the Iliad, everything he seems to speak about is somehow informed by the fact that he knows it won't be long and I'm going to get jacked. Of course, think about this. For the Greeks, they understand only humans can have kleos, glory. Because gods don't die. They're immortal. And therefore, there's no point in worrying about the glory for them because they don't die. Which takes us, obviously, to our study of ontology. What is it that the Greeks have to say about who we are? Well, fundamentally, we're mortal. We gotta die. And everything that informs who we are is somehow contingent on that. That is to say, we are fated. Now that F word is a fascinating word. The true F word, of course, of Greek mythology is fate, right? Although, as one of my students pointed out, the common F word that's obscenity for us can also mean this word within the study of Greek thought. Because it's like we're pretty much jacked from the very beginning. From the moment of conception, the understanding is you're doomed to a fate that ultimately means you don't breathe anymore. And because of the way the Greeks understand afterlife, there are no Scooby snacks teaming in the afterlife. No. There's no such thing as, okay, you're a good person so you get to go to heaven and have a really good life for eternity and all of that. We'll get to that with St. Augustine later, of course, in Christian theology. But for the Greeks, they don't have any of that kind of idea. The only Scooby snacks teammate are what happened right now. In other words, you got to collect that stuff while you're still breathing. But ontologically speaking, you don't breathe for very long. And therefore, whoever you are, you're kind of defined by that realization. That if you're going to do anything and be anything, it's going to have to happen in a very short span of time. Well, what does that mean? Well, you got to define what it is that you're going to do in that short span of time. Antigone to Ismene, we have to bury the body of Polynices. Ismene, you're an idiot. We'll get killed. Men make the rules. We have to keep the rules. I mean, that's the only thing we can do. Antigone, I don't care if it kills me. I'm going to do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. That is to say, she's ready to commit an act that she knows will lead to her own death. Orestes, he will decide to kill his own mother, but of course he's aware this is probably going to damn me, plague me for the rest of my life. And without the help of Athena, of course, at the end of the play, the trilogy, you know, he is probably jacked, right? Okay, he gets a you know, kind of a get out of jail card free. But we understand these plays are all set up to help us appreciate, most poignantly in the Bacchae, where Pendarus will ultimately be torn apart by his own mother, destroyed on the mountains. He wants to participate in the Bacchanalian rites by being a voyeur, watching, and in the end, he becomes part of the experience, and it destroys him. Right? Maybe the last great play of Greek tragedy. What is it that Aristotle says in his Poetics about epistemology and about ontology? Let's go there now. Well, he says, look, when you watch a protagonist go through that fall as an audience member, you are reminded of two things. Epistemologically, you don't know as much as you think you do. Ergo, humility is probably a good idea. The moment that a human being starts thinking, absolutely, I know that I am right, these myths, these stories seem to suggest, not so fast, not so fast, right? And of course, it always begs the question, is it a good thing or a bad thing to be a smart guy? Think about this, right? Oedipus, I know the answer to the riddle of the Sphinx, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, on 2 legs at noon, and on 3 legs in the evening. That's a human because we're speaking metaphorically. Give me the A in AP English. Well, the moment that he gets the right answer, Thebes is, of course, alleviated of its plague. He's invited to come in and be the king of Thebes to marry the beautiful queen whose husband, the king, was just killed recently. He thinks it's all great. And the play suggests, not so fast. Sometimes being a smart guy can get you in a lot of trouble. Think about Odysseus and the challenges that he goes through in the Odyssey, because he is so quick-witted and he is such a smart guy, but sometimes it can get him into trouble, right? Ontologically, Aristotle's Poetics says, here's the thing. You're human when you can begin to identify with another's pain, because life is suffering. I mean, you're jacked. From the moment of conception, you're jacked. Life is suffering. But can you identify with another's suffering? Which takes us now finally to our last two ologies. Psychology, the individual consideration of both epistemological and ontological awareness. And sociology, those motivations that drive the group. Let's ask about both now quickly. Notice for Aristotle, he will argue that fear is the inevitable first response when one comes into pain, especially when one witnesses pain for another. If Oedipus can do something insane and not realize it's insane, marry his mom, kill his dad, have children with his mom, he doesn't do that on purpose. If that can happen to him, that can happen to me. Ergo, fear. And if fate is the first F word, then obviously the second F word is fear, isn't it? Because notice, these texts all kind of seem to inform the viewer, the reader, the listener, if we're the original ones of the Iliad, right? Right about the moment you think things are going to go great for you, jacked. Well, that's kind of freaky, right? Especially when you live in a world where you're not really sure how long you're going to live if you step on a nail. You know what I mean? Medicine is not so great. So in other words, you can die at any given moment. Mortality rate, really, unbelievably high rate. Children, to live to be the age of you guys, in Greek culture, is quite a remarkable thing, which is why you have to have so many children, right? Because so many of them will die. So you're constantly aware death is coming. The fly swatter is coming. So the obvious question is, when you get up in the morning, how do you not just walk around going, oh no, 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 is today the day the fly swatter jacks me? Is today the day the fly swatter jacks me? The second response is that pathos, that pity, that sympathy, or we would even qualify it if you've been through the experience of empathy, where you're watching another go through that terrible thing that's happening. And you go, oh, I really feel badly for anyone that's gone through that much pain. Oedipus led off stage is a broken man. When Achilles falls in the dirt next to the broken, ruined body of Patroclus and is weeping, first instincts are to say, this is no way for a hero to act. Give me a break. And yet, second reading, and I think this is why St. Augustine's Confessions is so powerful, because St. Augustine, writing 400 years after the birth of Christ, will write in Confessions about the loss of a dear friend. And he comments on how excruciatingly painful it is because they're not there anymore. He says, I look up and he's not there. Achilles says the same thing about Patroclus. He keeps thinking he sees Patroclus, and in fact you do have the famous ghost scene of Patroclus where he says, hey dude, would you like to take care of the burial part of my body? I need to kind of get onto the underworld, do you think? In other words, that pain, that suffering that we witness in another identifies us with each other as human, as somehow being connected in some way. Leading us, of course, to ask some very interesting questions about our ethics, our morals, the understanding of what makes us agree to what is right and what is wrong. Now, we haven't mentioned them yet in our comments, so we probably should. There is, of course, the gods. And those gods drive so much of the action of these stories, because we cannot forget, these stories were originally, I mean, we call them mythology after Edith Hamilton does, right? And we think of that word as meaning, oh, those things that are untrue. No. That is not how the Greeks understood them. The Greeks understood them as